It's been hard for Britons to think about the extent to which slavery has shaped our history. And there are many physical remnants of that, the country houses that were built on slaving wealth, the art collections that were accumulated by slave owners, the ways in which sugar became an absolutely central part of the diet of the entire British population from the 18th century onwards, the ways in which British financial and commercial institutions have actually been built on Atlantic slave trade and slavery.
Africans were enslaved in the United States between 1619 and 1865. Approximately 12 million Africans were stolen from their homes and packed on ships, which could hold up to 600 like sardines. Just over 300,000 arrived in America. Congress outlawed the African slave trade in 1808, but the domestic slave trade continued in the U.S. Maintaining the institution of slavery was the root cause of the Civil War. Nearly 179,000 black men fought for the Union in the Civil War. The 13th Amendment formally abolished slavery in the United States on December 6, 1865.
While slavery in America was ended by the U.S. Civil War, racial discrimination was legally retained in the Jim Crow laws. These laws, which were prevalent in southern states, separated black and white Americans in all social spheres. Black people were required to use different and often inferior bathrooms, schools, and other public facilities. Alexander highlighted that the Jim Crow laws were overturned in the mid-20th century, largely thanks to the Civil Rights Movement. However, Alexander argued that despite this, new trends in law enforcement mean that discrimination has continued in other forms. For Alexander, the war on drugs is the main culprit. Police disproportionately search young black men and are more likely to imprison them for nonviolent drug offenses. Upon being released, black Americans find themselves stripped of key rights, for example, the right to vote. Further, they are often denied employment due to background checks. Alexander believed that this process deprives black Americans of their rights as effectively as the Jim Crow laws. However, this discrimination is harder to see as it is due to unspoken prejudices instead of overtly racist laws.
The 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes it unconstitutional for someone to be held as a slave. There are exceptions, including criminals.
The loophole was immediately exploited. What you got after that was a rapid transition to a mythology of black criminality.
Beasts that needed to be controlled.
You better believe it.
I'm only human.
The states were required to keep these prisons filled, even if nobody was committing a crime.
It's so difficult to talk about mass incarceration because it has become heavily monetized.
I'm only human.
We now have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves back in the 1850s.
I'm only human.
We are the products of the history that our ancestors chose. Products of that set of choices that we have to understand in order to escape from it.
Police killed more than 1,000 people in America in 2019. Black people are currently 3 times more likely to be killed by police, and 99% of killings by a police officer between 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in criminal charges.
Part of the reason the killing of unarmed blacks continues to happen at an alarming rate is because we haven't properly addressed our long history of racial terror, which has treated blackness as a proxy for criminality, as a substitute for criminality. The problem is that the presumption of dangerousness is tightly bound to race. For so many, for police officers to justify the use of deadly force, they have to reasonably believe that their lives are in danger. In all of the high-profile killings of blacks over the past year, officers attest to feeling under threat. But what does this mean in the context of unarmed citizens? It means that black skin triggers a heightened sense of threat, a life-threatening sense of threat, that then influences the officer's decision to use deadly force.
This is Brixton, 1981. Tensions erupt between the black community and police. Many here felt over-policed and underprotected. A lot of young black people believe that officers treated them unfairly because of their race. In the 90s, the murder of Stephen Lawrence in South London brought racial conflict to the surface again. The investigation into his death was flawed. In 1999, the Macpherson report looked into how police handled the case. They found the Metropolitan Police guilty of what it called institutional racism and recommended big changes. In 2011, anger erupted on the streets of the capital after Mark Duggan was shot and killed while police tried to arrest him. The government's own figures show black people are 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched, but campaigners believe the number could be higher. And black people are also more than twice as likely to die in police custody in England and Wales. Black Lives Matter bubble didn't actually start with police brutality. It began after the death of Trayvon Martin at the hands of an armed vigilante.
It is a story that no one can stop talking about, the shooting of Trayvon Martin.
On a February evening in 2012 in Sanford, Florida, Neighborhood Watch volunteer George Zimmerman called the police to report a suspicious person and started following 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Moments later, neighbors reported hearing gunfire. Zimmerman accepted he shot Martin, claiming self-defense. He wasn't immediately charged. In fact, it took 44 days for him to be arrested, only after national media attention, a petition signed by more than 1 million people, and a public response from the then president.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. We're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
A year later, Zimmerman was found not guilty of all charges by a jury of 6 women, 5 of them white. The acquittal caused outrage and sparked the birth of a new kind of civil rights movement. After Zimmerman's acquittal, activist Alicia Garza posted on Facebook, "Black people, I love you. I love us. Our lives matter. Black Lives Matter." Garza's friend Patrice Couleur shared the final 3 words as a hashtag. On the 7th of March 2013, Black Lives Matter was first seen on Twitter. Writer and immigrant rights activist Opal Tometi offered to build social media platforms for it, where activists could connect with one another.
Black Lives Matter is our call to action. It is a tool to reimagine a world where Black people are free to exist, free to live. It is a tool for our allies to show up differently for us.
The Black Lives Matter movement took root and gained momentum as black people continued to die at the hands of white police. It was a cycle of killings, protests, and no criminal charges.
No federal charges, no state criminal charges.
African Americans bear the brunt of the economic downturn brought on by the coronavirus.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, 46-year-old George Floyd was victim to these conditions. He'd lost his restaurant job and tested positive for COVID-19. Suspecting Floyd of using a forged $20 bill, police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on his neck for several minutes. The world watched and started speaking out. All 4 police officers involved in Floyd's killing were arrested on murder charges, brought about by that video, but also in part by the strength of Black Lives Matter protests across America and the world. Protesters say they'll continue to fight until disparities like these in the UK are gone. Countries around the world are now working out what Black Lives Matter means to them.
People of all backgrounds, genders, and races have come together to demand change. Honor them, honor George, and make the necessary changes.
But it's not just police that prop up this myth of black danger. This myth gets reinforced and takes on a truth-like quality through everyday interaction. When a black man passes and a woman clutches her purse. In talking about the current racial crisis, we tend to focus all of our attention on police and overlook our own complicity in creating an environment in which black lives are not treated as equal. It's all of us who in big ways through our actions and in small ways by our silences support this lie, because that's what it is, right? It's a lie, that somehow black folk are just more dangerous than the rest of us. Today, people are taking to streets and are demanding to be seen, not as dangerous, but as people whose lives have value and deserve protection. Some of these groups are associated directly and some indirectly with the Black Lives Matter movement. Without the efforts of these groups, so many of these killings of unarmed blacks would have been swept under the rug, and we would have lost attention long ago. The stories of police brutality and killings of unarmed blacks is not a story about black people. It's a story about all of us.
My friend Teresa asked me to craft an answer to the question, what makes me me? I was born in 1954 in Detroit, Michigan, and my birth certificate called me a colored girl. In the 60s, I was labeled a Negro as I watched the National Guardsmen throw tear gas right near my front porch. That day would become part of what is now known as one of the deadliest riots in our country's history in my hometown of Detroit, Michigan. In the 70s and 80s, I was labeled a black woman as I traversed the world in the field of technology. I found myself in a situation where I had to acquire a visa as an honorary white person. Yes, I had a visa as an honorary white person in order to eat, sleep, and work in Johannesburg, South Africa. I think about the fact that in the 90s and 2000s, I was labeled then an African American, along with my husband, my son, and my daughter. We were all expert by that time at being very chameleon-like. But think about companies when they rebrand and change their name over and over. Some survive, some don't. That's just like us. Some of us have survived and some haven't. You may ask, why is this so difficult? Well, consider this. What if you lived one life in private and with your black friends and another totally different persona in public where your identity is being changed by others all the time? Only 0.1% of the bright, capable people I grew up with received a college degree. When you're the only one, the first one, the odd one, or the token, it can be really difficult to deal with. So if you say, why is it I'm only getting 50 cents for every dollar that I earn? You're probably going to be labeled the angry black woman. Anybody ever heard that one? And the labels continue. It's when my 12-year-old daughter came home crying from basketball practice with her friends one night. Why was she crying? Because they called her a nigger. And when I called the coach, furious, he said, oh, it's no big deal. They're just being kids. That when I look at my tall, 6'8", gentle, kind, handsome, and of course genius son, he is my son after all, that 1 in 3 black boys have been in prison today. 1 in 6 Latinas have been in prison. Put quite simply, it means that someone in my extended family has been incarcerated, because guess what? There are more than 3 black boys born to my extended family. This is happening here in America, in the land of the free. And black women, oh, that's me, are incarcerated 2 times as often as white women. And I'd like you to know that our family does have a lot of joy and a lot of fun. Everything I've shared with you is part of what makes me, me. And some of it is because of the color of my skin. I'm the CEO of a small software development company. My first name is Ava, my middle name Latanya, and my married name Hilton. Ava Latanya Hilton loves her family, her husband, daughter, and son more than life itself, is blessed with an extended family that's supportive and loving. And as you continue your days, weeks, months, and your life, I'd ask you to be safe, be well, and please try to love your fellow human beings, not hate them because of the color of their skin.
My name is Derek Utomaru. I am a Chicago artist, activist. I work in sexual health advocacy. I'm not from Chicago. I was born and raised in North Carolina in the South, in the country. I've since moved to Chicago a few years ago, and here we are. I've been asked by the British High Commissioner to share how I feel about civil rights in the United States. Been asked to share my feelings. And I thought maybe the best way I could do this would be to share a writing that I created for an exhibition called This is America, that's actually in the Netherlands right now, that is accompanied by a piece of artwork that I've created. So without further ado, thank you for having me, and here goes. It is of utmost importance for me to disclaim, my existence is Black, and the work that I make is Black. And the suffering of existing as Black in America cannot be removed from my artwork, which chooses not to show this suffering at all, but instead it ponders what Black is. The summer is Black, Black as the asphalt, Black as the day, and at its best, Chicago is unrelenting. Hot enough to put you on your ass most days, while at the same time warning you to better not get back up again. Just stay down. And summer 2020 is no different, except for it seems after years of already knowing about racial injustice, white folks are finally marching in the streets again in a forceful way, as if they'd never known that police injustice existed before now. Since its onset, I have cynically believed this call to action is more due to COVID-19. It's keeping people cooped up far too long for their liking, and the general need to disobey authority, albeit for a good cause, is the real reason white folks are out in the street right now. Without a doubt, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were the catalyst for this newfound awareness. But let's not forget, Black folks around the world and in America especially have been marching and protesting as long as protesting and marching have existed. This summer, I was assaulted by the Chicago Police Department while protesting in the heart of downtown. In the same moments, a friend of mine named Andrew attempted to protect me, was knocked from his bike, thrown to the ground, and beaten by multiple officers for simply telling the police what they were doing to me was wrong. I'd done nothing deserving of assault, except for existing and occupying space as a Black man in America. Andrew is white. The dissonance I had as I watched from my home, bruised and battered the next day, a parade that made national headlines with police cooperation, news cameras, crowds and crowds of white folks seemingly safe from physical harm, then, and especially now, exist as a reminder of the racial division in the United States and how unaware so many people are of it. A stark reminder, if you are a Black youth from the inner city, the cameras won't be recording. And if they are not recording, and if the news crews are not present, then the police will have their way with you. They will kill you, drive home, and sleep in their own beds like nothing has happened. As I said earlier, I was not born and raised in Chicago, but that day I marched with students who were Black students, some white as well, who all seemed to be from Chicago, all of whom were vocal about their feelings towards injustice and of the very existence of a police state in America. Fuck the police. Say her name, Breonna Taylor. Say his name, George Floyd. No justice, no peace, no racist ass police, we all chanted. Not a single one of us rioted. Not a single one of us looted a damn thing. The most vocal of them were Black women who couldn't have been but 16, 17, 18 years of age. I had yelled at an officer pushing a woman to the ground, "Stop pushing her. Stop hitting them." Get your hands off of her. As he began assaulting these women. No cameras in sight, no national attention to this. Beaten for existing, bruises for being alive, for breathing downtown. A week later, my own bruises hadn't subsided. And folks asked me to take photos and use it in my artwork, which I declined. I am no stranger to calling out the nuances of how white supremacy disenfranchises Black artists. How every experience we must have must be substantiated with life's Black experience unless the merit of my craft. We are under constant surveillance, which maybe for the first time in my life was helpful during my assault. If it wasn't for a woman recording from her rooftop, only those present would have seen what happened to Andrew and I, and we wouldn't have had proof of how irresponsibly violent Chicago PD treats protesters. In America, police are not here to protect us. In America, Black folks are murdered in cold blood, in warm blood, in hot summer days by institutionalized systems that deny us shade, murdered in prison by institutionalized systems that put us there for 420, for marijuana, for green, and even lesser offenses than that. People in jail, Black folks, have been dying from COVID-19 all summer. And not enough people are talking about it. Murdered by police officers, shot in the back, paralyzed, thrown to the pavement. And the police seldom wear masks, at least not the ones who spit in my face, physically assaulted me, destroyed my property, and fabricated multiple stories as to why I was assaulted in the first place. I don't know what is coming next. It may be fall, but the summer is still hot. And we still need to defund the police and arrest the murderers of Breonna Taylor, amongst so many other things wrong in America. How many white people in America are prepared to take a bullet for Black lives? There is no shade in this heat. Where is it we can go to rest? Clearly not at home in our own beds.